What does it mean to challenge the status quo? Today we're going to be talking about finding your own path. In today's world of volatility and uncertainty and a lot of chaos, we're hearing a lot about changing the status quo. But what does that really mean? And how do we go about doing it? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome, I'm Kim Marie, and this channel is all about supporting women to step into their most empowered self so they can live their most fulfilling life. Today we're going to look at what challenging the status quo is all about. What is the status quo? How do we challenge it? What are the pros and cons of challenging the status quo? I'm going to share some examples of challenging the status quo that might be helpful in your own life and how to take steps toward challenging the status quo effectively. So first of all, what exactly is the status quo? Well, it's a set of conventionally or normally accepted beliefs or ideas that are rarely challenged, that are considered typical or normal or standard practice. And often these standard practices are accepted without question. Now, we might want to challenge the status quo in various domains of our life, right? There are people marching on Washington to challenge the political world and experience. There are people challenging the status quo by simply having different practices in their home, different parenting methods, different approaches to the way that they work or the way they choose to work. So this idea of challenging the status quo is something around not just some big march on Washington or any kind of big protesting, but also just looking at our lives and challenging, questioning, is this the way I want to live? So is this the way I want to work? Is this where and how I want to be in my life? And so challenging the status quo is really about questioning what is. So we do want to question conformity and the assumptions that we make. I've often talked about thinking in terms of what rules are we following? And I don't mean just the rules set in your town or your state or your country. I'm talking about our own inner rules. A lot of times society and culture have certain rules that we are expected to follow, or at least we think we're expected to follow. And we adopt those conventions, and that conforming practice becomes a habit that we aren't even aware of. So it's important to start questioning some of these ideas, these assumptions, these rules, these values that may or may not even be ours, in order for us to grow and feel more empowered in our life, aligned with our own unique values. So it's important also to identify areas of your life where you might have some of these hidden values that you're conforming to or rules that you're conforming to. For instance, one of the things that can be really powerful to consider is in the realm of our relationships. Many of us have certain expectations around what love is and what love isn't. And many of you might have heard of the concept of the 5 love languages. And different people have different ideas about what love is or how to give and receive love. And so this idea of our own conventional expectations of this is love, this is not, might be hindering us in our relationships and really keep us stuck from moving forward or growing or connecting on a deeper level because we haven't taken the time to explore what love really means to our partner, what love means to us. And that's a really critical way of questioning the rules or the values that are lying beneath the surface that we might not be so aware of, and challenging the status quo of the relationship. Now, there of course are benefits and risks associated with challenging the status quo. The benefits, of course, are we have the opportunity to have growth, to evolve. Life over millennia has not evolved without a certain level of challenging the status quo. We've seen leaders come and go based on challenging the status quo, some good, some not so good. And we've also seen evolution of species that do things differently in order to adapt and challenge what is and say, oh, maybe I don't have to live this way. Maybe I can live this way and adapt to the situation and the circumstance. So often, challenging the status quo means being able to grow and expand into more of who we are. And if we're going to step into our personal empowerment and learn to trust ourselves, we have got to start looking at how we challenge the status quo of what is and where we can make changes and choices to do things differently. Now, of course, with the risks of challenging the status quo, we have the potential for backlash, for discomfort, for anger, for frustration, for disappointment. The reality is the majority of the people in society, culture, the planet are used to things being a certain way. And when we get used to things being a certain way, we develop habits, we adopt those patterns, we get used to those patterns, and when someone challenges us, it disrupts everything. It can disrupt our nervous system. It can disrupt our comfort level. It can even disrupt the dynamics happening within a family, within a community. And so those kinds of challenges, whenever we see that happen, basically the lower ego, our lower nature that gets used to just kind of going on autopilot, we don't feel so good. It kind of feels threatened. That lower ego feels threatened. And part of the challenging of the status quo is to allow that higher ego, that I am self, that true self, with your inner wisdom, your inner knowing, your inner trust, to go ahead and question what is, so that you can move forward and maybe create something new and adapt in new ways and grow as a human being. Now, I want to share just a couple of simple examples of challenging the status quo. Now, of course, we have the macrocosmic level, we could call it, where we have things like the civil rights movement or women's rights movements or other movements around the globe that have happened, whether through war or through peaceful protest or through massive changes in behavior of community at large, right? So we have that macrocosmic concept of challenging the status quo. We also have maybe an in-between concept where companies that start to do things differently. Even if we look at Apple as a company, that was one of their main, I don't know that it was a tagline, but sort of a value or mission statements was challenging the status quo, to move forward by challenging the status quo, believing that things could happen that had never happened before. And that was a huge aspect of what people started to follow them for, what they became known for. And that on many levels changed on a macrocosmic level, but it also changed a lot around the microcosmic level, which is where people are changing what they're doing in their day-to-day lives. Now, this might include things like questioning our shoulds, stepping out of our comfort zone, setting more boundaries than what people around us are used to, reevaluating our values, and habit shifting our patterns, trying new things, mixing things up. We want to actually disrupt things on many levels in order to create that change. Perhaps you've had a situation where you're working really hard, you can't even think anymore, and you go take a walk and all of a sudden inspiration comes to you. All of a sudden something new is coming to you and you have renewed energy and renewed ideas and inspiration, right? In a way, that walk upsets the status quo of sitting at your desk continuing to work when something's not working anymore. And sometimes we need that disruption to bring change. So this is where it can be really important, both macrocosmically and microcosmically, to disrupt and shift and move out of the status quo. So of course we can't really do much to change the status quo without taking action to change the status quo. And one of the first things that I highly encourage anyone to do if they're looking to make change in their life and shift how things are is to really evaluate what is and what you want to create. We can't really understand where we're going or the shifts that we want to make without having somewhat of a picture of where we are. And if you're not clear on where you want to go, even just journaling and spending time looking at where you don't want to be and maybe considering what's the opposite of that. And I have a free download for you. It's my journaling workbook that gives you all kinds of wonderful tips on journaling and how to journal and different techniques to journal. So I invite you to download that. It's a wonderful tool for helping with any kind of reevaluation or contemplation or reflection work that you want to do. Another thing you can do to effectively challenge the status quo is to surround yourself with supporters. Now, again, this is not about going on a political march or something like that. But if you want to change things in your life and make a shift, most likely you're not going to easily be able to do it alone. That's one of the biggest things that holds us back. We try to make a shift and everyone around us says, we don't like that. That's not you. That's not how we're used to things. Or even if we try to make a shift macrocosmically, we usually need people with us to help do it in ways that bring greater acceptance, that bring a greater understanding or encourage what we're trying to do and share the same values. That is so, so, so important. And I invite you also to check out my Solace program, which is a beautiful women's program, ongoing membership. It only enrolls in January of each year. So definitely get on the wait list if you're watching this video at a time when it's not open for enrollment. But it's a beautiful place to have community of like-minded souls on this path seeking to transform and shift their life toward that place of fulfillment. Now, another piece is daily practices. If you've watched me for a while, you know that practice is one of the keys that I encourage. If we are going to change the status quo and shift the status quo, it doesn't easily happen overnight. I mean, sure, okay, we could say that we have eggs for breakfast every single day, and then we wake up one day and decide to have granola, and voila, we've shifted the status quo. But the reality is, if you want to truly shift the status quo, you're shifting it for a sustainable shift, for the long haul, for the better, hopefully. So you're not going to be able to do that without ongoing practice. In other words, let's see if you really like that granola every day for breakfast. Or maybe you want to experiment for a little while to see what really works. Maybe it's going to be an alternation of things. Maybe there's a new practice that you have for self-care that you want to see if you can maintain for a long period of time. I myself noticed that I was starting to get burnt out with the routine that I had, and I chose to implement a new self-care routine to interrupt the status quo of the way I was working and the way I was taking care of myself. And I had to practice staying with it for a long time. And now I can say I'm many months into that, and it feels vastly different, okay? So we need to practice to stay with it. The other piece that we want to consider is the importance of persistence and resilience. So practice is one thing. It's what we do to change the habit. We practice doing this thing. But we need to have perseverance and persistence and resilience to meet potentially backlash when we're trying to change the status quo, to meet the naysayers, to be able to stay true within ourselves. This takes time. It takes practice. It takes a lot of energy, but I promise you, the more you do it, the easier it will get. Ultimately, challenging the status quo is about evolutionizing life, both globally and in your own immediate surroundings and your immediate life. This striving toward fulfillment always comes with a certain amount of challenging the status quo. I encourage you to subscribe, like, let other people know about this video that you think could be benefiting from it. It really helps the channel, it helps me spread the word, and it helps us empower more women along the path. I'll see you in the next video.